some questions for you. Hey, brave girl, how you do the things that you do?
You guys, let's just jump straight into the episode. We are so excited. We have special guest, Ashleigh Dilello, who's a good friend of mine. Do you recognize her? She was a contestant on So You Think You Can Dance, and she is the founder and creator of bioemotional healing, a revolutionary method based in neuroscience that helps her clients around the world finally break free from chronic pain, limiting beliefs, and emotional trauma to thrive in their lives. Despite being told by doctors she wouldn't live past her teenage years, she refused to give up and discovered the secret to rewiring the mind and body connection. She became an elite athlete, TV and Broadway star, entrepreneur, mind coach, mother, and motivational speaker. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for
I
having
feel like we
me.
should clap after
I
that.
know. That's a bio worth clapping for.
Exactly. Ashleigh, give us your story.
Okay, we're gonna 25 years into concise.
to 5 minutes.
Yes, super concise. It started early, so I started dancing as soon as I could walk, and that was the love and passion of mine, like 5 hours a day. And one day I was doing that, and I was loving life, and then literally overnight I was 13 years old and fighting for my life. And the hardest part about it was, and we'll talk about that with my brain and nervous system that I didn't understand, is the more something happens in life that takes you by complete shock, the brain is a predicting machine. So anything that happens that you don't have any lead up of, oh my gosh, something's gonna happen, or I need to prepare myself, the more it alters the brain and nervous system. So I was healthy one day, right? Felt completely fine, woke up and could hardly move, pain in every joint and muscle. And that was the start of 4.5 years of fighting for my life. And the hardest part about it is no one could figure it out. So, whenever you don't feel good physically, you just want to know what's happening, right? You want a diagnosis, or at least, because then you can have a clear path, right? And that was the hardest. I was going all over the country. I was tested by every specialty. And they knew I had a rare viral infection, but no one could diagnose it. So therefore, nobody could treat it. And essentially, I was sent home to die. Even here in Utah from Primary Children's, they were like, we can't do anything, And I remember a doctor came in, and this was such a defining moment. It was one of those really sterile rooms, where like it's all white and creaky, and you're like moving. And back in the day with the paper like things where you're like,
Scrubs,
they're just like tearing open, and you're trying to. And I remember he wheeled up, one of those stools, and he literally looked across from me and said, "You need to accept you're not going to live past your teenage years."
Wow.
And what's crazy is he didn't stop there. He was like, you're never going to dance again. You're never going to get married. You're not going to have children. And the sooner you accept it, the easier it will be to come to terms with your reality, right? I'm 13 years old. And I remember just, like, what do you do with that? I remember at first just being like, what happened to my life? And I remember looking down and feeling like I have a big decision. And I credit my mom for not jumping in, because I know she wanted to. And I just decided, and I looked at him and I'm like, I don't accept that. And they actually sent in a psychologist to talk to me, right? Telling me I wasn't accepting, the reality. And I was like, listen, I know I'm dying. I can feel it way more than you can, right? But in me was this understanding that if I accepted I was dying right then and there, right? And I'm not saying that doesn't have its place sometimes, right? And you got to come to peace with certain places and circumstances. But I'm 13 and I'm like, if I accept that, then I know any possibility of beating this is gone.
Yeah.
Right? So we walked out of the hospital and I had no idea what to do. I just knew that I wasn't going to just accept that my life now was over at 13. So it was a long road. That led us down, to what we now understand as functional medicine and alternative medicine, which back then was like voodoo. People thought you were going to like dreadlocks with burning incense, you know?
Fan
like
at the table.
20, we're talking about like
25,
25, 26 years ago, and I come from a medical family, but also that's when I really started to understand the power of the mind, because I had nights where, I got so weak, I couldn't even lift a finger. My hair had fallen out, my skin was yellow from my liver shutting down. Like, I remember telling my mom, it hurts me to be here, laying here. Like, it took so much energy to lay still. And I would be afraid to go to sleep at night because I felt like if I surrendered that will to live, my body was like,
Ready to shut
we're
you
done,
later.
you know? And that's when I really started to understand how powerful the mind is. So I defied the odds. It took 4.5 years between life and death, 6 years before I could step back into a dance studio. So now I'm almost 20 years old. I haven't danced in 6 years. And what's remarkable about that with the brain, and we're going to talk about that, is it was my ability to come back and be a professional dancer. Because in any sport or art, those teenage years are huge, right?
That's where you're defined as an
that's where you're
athlete or
defined.
not.
That's right.
Right.
And all those years. And so we'll talk about that, and we're going to do an exercise all together just to demonstrate how powerful the brain is. But then I had an amazing career with my husband, and we were able to both be on So You Think You Can Dance, and we were national amateur finalists in the United States, since ballroom are competitors, and then we did Broadway, and I was a speaker, right, because I had overcome something and defied these odds, and then been able to go to an elite level in my profession. But then everything changed again 6 years ago, and I had a second hip surgery, and it failed, and launched my whole body into chronic pain. And I went from an elite athlete to not being able to walk, barely being able to hold a book. I now had a 2-year-old daughter, which I was told I'd never have, and now I can't lift her. I can't take care of her. And they told me, you know, again, went down that same road. It felt very deja vu, like all the tests, all the scans, seeing all the specialists, and nobody could really tell me what had happened except for, you know what, your nervous system flipped a switch in the surgery, and that can happen sometimes. And it flipped into pain, and guess what, you're a chronic pain patient now, right? And to that point, I had the leading spinal specialist here in Utah say, you know, you're not getting any younger, and it's only downhill from here. Like, I can't make this stuff up, right? Yeah. And I told him, like, he could shove that where the sun didn't shine, because I wasn't like 85. I was 34 years old, you know? I know. And what made me more mad is how many times we've all been told, this is who you are, this is what your life's gonna look like, and we accept it, right? And I'm like, you're the expert. And a lot of people, you know, especially medically, weren't raised to question the expert, right? Especially when your life looks like that, right? My life had all the evidence in the world to say, yep, this is your life, because I was getting worse. I had pain in like 12 areas of my body, right? Barely sleeping. Anyway, after again, trying everything, functional,
You traveled all around the world.
all over the world.
I remember, like,
over 200 injections,
like, how
specialists.
did this hip, like, how did it fail? You're this thriving ballroom dancer, and all of a sudden you're just chronically ill.
Yeah, and I was also a personal trainer, right? And so I was really
so
strong, and I
healthy.
cherished that from a place of like too weak to walk to now be like a machine in terms of like, wow, my body is so strong and resilient. And so then I really got to a place of desperation, and I looked at my husband, and I'm like, there's nothing left to try. Like, there's nothing left to try. And that's when, thankfully, from what I'd gone through when I was younger, it's like, I'm not going to just accept this. So if my nervous system flipped a switch into pain, I'm going to figure out how to flip it back. And that's when I self-studied neuroscience, like 4 or 5 hours a day, all with the intention of understanding the brain and nervous system and how they get stuck in patterns. And it doesn't matter if it's physical pain or emotional pain or thought patterns, it's the same. The brain and nervous system are the command center of everything. All pain comes from the brain, even though felt in the body. And the same thing with emotions that we feel and thought patterns, the brain is the origin of everything. So in that, I realized, well, nobody has a process. Like, how do I rewire my brain, right? Out of physical pain or emotional pain. How do you do that? Because the answer has to come from the inside, because you're the only one that lives inside your mind and body, right? So that's when, out of really to save my own life, I was my own guinea pig, and I put all the pieces of not just what I was studying with neuroscience, but all the experts I had learned from for 25 years, and then what I had experienced in my own body, my own mind, because going through what I went through the last few years, I realized the way my body reacted to the surgery wasn't just that the surgery failed, it was that I had had this subconscious stress response running since I had been sick, right? Because you can't go through these really big challenges in your life and it not alter your nervous system, right? So even though I was highly functioning in life, that was running. So the surgery just tipped it over the edge. And then I realized I'd been really carrying this PTSD around my health for over 20 years, right? And so I thought, it's not just rewiring the brain, but all the pieces that have impacted the brain and the nervous system and now how they respond and the emotions as well, because you can't separate that. And what is that process and what are the steps? And that's what led to bioemotional healing. And now I've been doing that for 3.5 years and yet to see limits on what people can overcome.
You were telling me, I've seen you speak in many places and you're incredible, that you had a client who like got a brain scan. Tell us about that. That's a really cool story.
Yeah, it's so awesome because clearly, I mean, I don't have the funds for like a clinical trial yet. But I had a client who had Lyme disease, really serious, and went to a huge clinic back east. And Lyme can really impact the brain big time. So they, of course, do all the brain scans and see where it's functioning. And her brain was not functioning well. And she was really on the verge of death at that point. So they helped her a lot to not be like on that threat of dying, right? But she was still quite sick. And then she heard me on a podcast episode, and she had also experienced quite a bit of trauma in her life. And she thought, I feel like that's what I need to do, right? Because even no matter what's running in your nervous system, whatever you do to treat the body, you're still, if your nervous system is in stress, that's really hard for the body to heal, right? And you're constantly depleting your resources. And so she worked with me. We did bioemotional healing. And the key with it is, even though I work with them for 9 weeks, it's with them the rest of their life. It's a process they learn, and now they have the power and tools, and it's not just outside of them. So she went back to the clinic after working with me and doing bioemotional healing for 6 months after, and she did new brain scans. And her brain had improved in cognitive function by 40%.
Wow.
That's incredible.
That's so awesome.
Which was so cool because she had a friend who had stayed. And so they're staying there, not at their home. She was doing biofeedback and all these other neuro stuff that's dependent upon another person and technology. And her brain had improved by 38% in 2 years. Her brain improved by 40% in 6 months.
Wow.
And now she knows how to keep doing it, right? Which is why
She's
it's
not
so
dependent on the clinic.
cool. That's right.
So, I mean, obviously, sorry.
I think we should the same question.
Sure, right. Obviously, nine weeks with you, you do a lot of things that nobody can just do on their own by themselves. But would love, like, what are a few things that you did, and that even our audience can do to help flip the switch on, get their body from like
a trauma
sympathetic to
response.
parasympathetic, or some of the things that you would teach?
Let's start with that exercise, shall we, that we were talking about. You guys can get up, and if anyone, I encourage all those watching to also do this, like, or whoever wants to get up, maybe not with the baby, to try this at home, right? Just to then open the gateway of what I'm going to talk about, okay? So get a little bit of wiggle room with staying in. So I know, I would feel very short. Okay, so what I want you to do is just, and maybe all face forward if you can, just to get kind of a perspective of what's going to happen. So I want you to just think of raising that right arm at shoulder level, okay? And your feet are just maybe hip width apart, nice and comfortable. The goal is that, so spread your feet out just a little bit. I know we're limited on space, just so you're like
Maybe I'll go a little back.
There we go.
That
There
way
we go.
there's more
Stagger.
room. Yeah.
There we go. And I want you to keep your feet planted, okay? And then I just want you to rotate clockwise, and just to see how far you can rotate without moving your feet.
Get underneath
Don't
your
hit
arm.
each other, right? And don't strain your back.
So I'm right in front of the blue.
Okay, and just kind of memorize there on the wall where you get to, okay? Yes? All right, now you can lower that hand and come back. Now I just want you to stay where you are, and I'm just going to walk you through a brief visualization, okay? So you're not going to do anything physically, okay? So I just want you to take a deep breath first. Relax. Let your hands hang free, okay? So try to no tension in the body, and just keep your eyes closed, okay? So now I just want you to imagine raising that right arm again and rotating, but this time you're able to rotate twice as far, Okay, so whatever restriction was there that was holding you to that end point now is gone, and you're able to rotate twice as far. And I just want you to try to feel that in your body, and that fluidity and that ease in which you're able to rotate. Okay, so just sit in that for a second, and then imagine rotating back to the front and lowering that right arm. And now I want you to do it again, imagining, but this time you're able to rotate 3 times as far. And it's like, dang, this is amazing. Look how flexible I am. And it's like your spine has no restrictions, right? You've been doing yoga suddenly and you're just super mobile and it feels good, right? So I want you to embody that it feels good. There's no strain to it, okay? So you sit in that and then you imagine rotating back to the front and lowering that right arm. And we're gonna do it one more time where you're imagining raising it, but this time rotating 3 times as far. And you can't help but have a smile on your face because, freak, that's amazing. Look at me, rotating.
Elastigirl.
That's right, Elastigirl. And the great part is that it's effortless, right? So it's effortless and it feels good and you're proud of yourself. And sit in that just for a second. And then imagine bringing that arm back down again, okay? So now I just want you to open your eyes. And you're gonna have to duck again. Now I just want you to actually physically raise your right arm again, okay? And now try to rotate again, right? And just see what happens,
What
right?
the heck?
Right, so.
Oh my gosh.
So, right? Two minutes maybe, right? So.
Crazy, huh?
Ow.
The real question, right, and why I want to do that is really to ask yourselves, right, in that 2 minutes, did we change your physical capacity?
No.
I mean,
Didn't
it's
go to
not
yoga, we
it's not
didn't
possible,
stretch,
right?
yeah.
If you really study the muscles, flexibility takes time, right? So what did we change?
Our mind.
Your mind, your belief, right? So what's important, and to your point, and why I wanted to segue with this, is we all have hundreds, thousands of beliefs, right? About everything, ourselves, other people, our worth, our potential, how things work in the world, our relationships. Like we all have it. That just happens by nature of life. Those beliefs are bodyguards around our reality. They're always deciding what our brain sees and what our brain lets in. So when we first stand up to rotate, you didn't know it, but you have a belief about what your body's able to do, right? And not strain your back and not hurt it. So that then puts a stopping point on your physical capacity, right? And the brain will stop that based upon what it thinks you can do, right? It has presupposed limits. Then that therefore becomes your reality, right? So all we did was expand the belief and the possibility, and therefore we changed your experience. Wow. Right?
That is, you guys just saw. I
I
could
know.
only stop there. I went all the way around.
Yeah.
Right?
To here.
You all did. You all ended up
Well,
like
and that's
pointing
why
at
I'm
me.
wondering, like, I'm also analyzing, like, how much did my environment and what I saw other people doing limit me as well? It's like, well, they stopped there, so therefore I stop here, right? Like, I wonder if that played like, I didn't think that consciously, but I wonder if that still even played a role with it. Like, maybe, you know.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because there's a really famous story around that point. And maybe you've heard it, but Roger Bannister in the 4-Minute Mile. For decades, people thought you couldn't run a mile in 4 minutes. And medically, when we're talking about belief systems, medically, doctors thought your heart would explode with that much effort, right? Cardiovascular effort. So for decades, you had coaches and teams around the world trying to figure out how to break that 4-minute mile, right? But people didn't believe it was possible, right? Speaking of environment and collective beliefs,
You're right.
right? So then one day, Roger Bannister in England on a gloomy, rainy day, so not optimal conditions, he broke the 4-minute mile, right? What happened? Within 2 weeks, people all over the world were doing it.
Really? Now all of a sudden
And
everyone
now
can do
high
it?
school students can do it, right? So what took nearly a century of dedicated teams
Century of
and
collective
experts But there was a belief system, right? And here's what's important to understand, and this is the premise. The brain is wired to validate beliefs. That's its wiring. So that's why whatever you believe you can or you can't, you will absolutely be right. Right? Yeah. So the cool thing about Roger Bannister is he did what nobody else was doing, which now elite athletes all do, is he visualized himself being able to break that 4-minute mile. Similar to what we did here, right? But over and over again, he saw himself, he saw him crossing that finish line, saw the time frame, felt the capacity. So what did he do? He started to break the barriers. Like, you think about it, if you're an athlete and you've been told, if you run that fast, your heart's gonna explode. Do you think you're going to run that fast?
No,
You might get close,
Yeah.
but your
gonna
brain,
edge off,
which is
yeah.
wired for survival,
Right.
is gonna be like, we're gonna slow that down. We're not gonna fire that
miserable, this is
muscle.
miserable, yeah.
So one of the first things, to your point, is to understand how important our beliefs are. Well, what are our beliefs, right? We can sit with that, but one thing to know is whatever we repeatedly think becomes a belief, right? So we all know what some of those default thoughts are that we've had
Right.
over and over around
Stinking
ourselves. Stinking thinking, negative thought loop, right? Self-limiting thoughts. I can't, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, nobody likes me, right? Whatever that not enough generally is, right? When you think that enough, you start believing it. Then, because your brain is seeking evidence to always validate your beliefs, it will find evidence in your life to support that, right? And it will look for it. So that's why it will point to certain experiences, and then all of a sudden you have that thought, see, you're not enough, you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough, you're not good enough. And so then it collects evidence and it gets stronger and stronger. And that belief system now is anchored in experiences. And now literally, that's what your brain is looking for, which means it blocks information that tells you you're enough, right? And that's why even you could tell someone, how do you not believe you're great or worthy or amazing? And you literally are like, I don't, and I can't. And no matter what you're telling me, it's not registering because that's the power of beliefs.
And I assume that also is the same of what you believe of others.
Sure, absolutely.
Because I had some,
I was thinking the
I
same
have to
thing.
be
I'm like, I can see how this
careful
applies to relationships.
what I talk about, but I feel like I've had that same thing recently where there was a belief about me when someone I was in a relationship with, and I just didn't understand, and they kept saying you're a bad mom or whatever, and then they started finding like reasons that it was, and like now it's such a concrete belief that nothing I ever would do or say would ever change the fact that they actually believe that about me, whether it's true or not.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
And absolutely. And isn't that powerful? And that's why I always tell my clients when I speak, ultimately, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are.
Yeah.
Because we always project what is an internal belief, right?
Always.
Right.
Always. And that's why it's so important to heal and work through that, because obviously, and we can see that it has such a huge impact on relationships, right?
Yeah.
And the brain is so powerful, again, to your point, it's wired to validate it. So
Right.
now it's going to start to see things with the intention
To prove its point. Right.
And that's why that's the helplessness part, because no one's in charge of that but the person, right? And if
And there's
they're not
nothing you
willing
can
to
do.
see it,
Their belief is their belief,
that's
whether
right.
it's completely false or not.
And I've seen that where even spouses like maybe don't trust the other spouse or something, and now it's like they could be on their computer replying to a work email, and it's like,
see
what
what
are
he's
you
doing?
looking at,
Yeah.
right? And
Their
then,
belief is
or
his-
they're staying up
yeah.
late watching a movie or they ran into somebody and now they're home late because they were having a conversation. But your brain will start attaching different meanings, whereas prior it wouldn't have gone there.
Yep.
Right? And so that's why it's so important, and obviously in certain regards it takes time in the process to get to some of the deep ones that a lot of people aren't even fully aware of. But a great place to start is to think, what are some of those thoughts that we all know we have default? And you need to understand now, if you've had that enough, that's a belief. And that belief now is creating a barrier around your life and your possibilities, and because the brain's wired to validate it, it's literally going to not allow you to live any different than what you believe is your experience.
So this is, I don't even know why I'm bringing this up, but as a child and a teen, I legitimately thought I was fat. I was 100 pounds.
I've seen
and I would
pictures.
tell myself,
Yeah.
I'm so fat, I'm over it. Like I had obviously body dysmorphia, but I feel like because I said it so much, I started living as if I was fat, and then I did gain weight, and like all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, my belief came true.
Yeah, you manifested your
Well,
own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, is that true? Could that happen?
Well, absolutely, because the brain is what creates what chemicals are running in the body, right? So that's
Cortisol.
a very stressful response. Yeah, cortisol, right? That's a super stressful response. And then it also gets attached to food, right? Because then it's the stress around what I'm eating or not eating.
Right.
And now you're creating cortisol when you eat, and that's holding on to food. And absolutely, and so you're not only just running that stress program all the time, which then puts your system more in cortisol, but you're looking for it. And it's so interesting because to that point, and you were a dancer, and I was too, and dancers get a bad rap, but nobody else lives in front of a mirror
Right.
in tight clothing, right?
And no one has mentors telling them.
5 hours a day,
Calling me Round Robin.
Yeah.
That was my name.
Jeez.
And I was 100 pounds, but she called me Round Robin.
Wow.
See,
Yeah.
and we all have those experiences, right? And this is to your point, and this is just for people to think about, because it's not only what is our thought, but it comes from someone else, and then we take ownership of it, we internalize it, and now it's taking root, right? And it literally can change the trajectory. To that point, when I was like 11, in ballet, our teacher had us stand up on the bar and tendu our leg out, right? And so I'm, like as flexing, pointing as hard as I can, like, because I thought she was going to critique our technique, right? And mind you, I think I'm 11, maybe 12. Now, at that time, you still have like really beanpole type bodies, but I had more muscle since I was young, which I'm super grateful for and has served me now with everything my body has gone through, right? But then, I look different than a lot of bodies who hadn't started to develop, right? And she's going around the room, and I'm like sweating because and then she starts pointing things out about people's bodies, which is making me nervous, right? Because it wasn't just technique. And we're in pink tights and a leotard. It's, it's not the most whatever on anybody, right?
Right.
And she's like, see everyone, she has overdeveloped quads, right?
She's telling this to you?
The whole class, right?
Clean it up for everybody to
And all of a sudden, I'm like, what? And literally to that point, I had never thought about my body other than it being the vessel to dance, right? And watching it for lines and technique, but I hadn't ever really thought about critiquing, but all of a sudden now I'm like looking at my legs, looking at other people's legs, and I have quad muscles where other girls at 11 don't, right? And so then I'm like, oh my gosh, my quads are bigger than, and again, to your point, I had an amazing little 11-year-old body, right? Like it's not, but now my brain is looking for it. Right? Yeah. And now it's looking at pictures to look for those overdeveloped quads, right? And because it's such a strong belief, you see it regardless of what's there. And that's why body dysmorphia is a real thing. Yeah. And how many times do people look back at old photos and be like, what? Like, why did I not enjoy that?
Right.
Right?
Have you seen the meme? Like, I wish I was as fat as I was when I first thought I was fat.
Right? Yeah. Right? To that
so
point.
true.
But the brain is so powerful that that's what you see.
Right.
And
I
that's why
legitimately thought I was fat. I was not even kidding, the most healthy, petite thing, and I was like, I am a size 0.
Oh my gosh.
I am huge. I'm huger than her. That boy who just threw me in the pool probably pulled his muscle because I'm so big. Like I literally believed
Robin,
it. No, I
so
did. I stole my childhood. I want to go back and be like, that teacher calling me Round Robin and like making me. But now I'm like, okay, if I had the power to convince myself I was fat, which was not true, I also have the power to convince myself I'm beautiful and amazing and kind and healthy and strong.
I love the way that you turned that.
Yeah,
You
it's
do
just
have the power for that.
and this is what's so powerful to understand. Nobody teaches us that we are all going to have negative thoughts. The brain is wired for negativity first. The brain isn't even...
It's a survival mechanism.
It's survival.
Yeah.
The brain like we all have this idea we're supposed to be happy all the time. The brain is not wired for happiness, right? That doesn't mean we need to create happiness, but it's wired for survival. It's wired to protect us physically and emotionally. So therefore, from that place of protection, what do? Well, what's the worst case scenario, right? What could go wrong? Because if I can anticipate that, and what if I can presuppose people are going to judge me this way before they actually judge me, because then it's not going to hurt me so badly, right? Which is why we also all care so much about what other people think or what we perceive they're thinking, right? So if we understood that everybody's brain does that, then we also understand that we get to decide what we pay attention to. Because we're all going to have, oh my gosh, I'm so dumb, they don't like me, like I'm fat, and then we get to actually decide, like, do I want to think that? Do I want that to be true? Well, if I don't, then guess what? I have the power to choose something different. And they might think that, and so many dance teachers, I think, do that because they have their own body issues and therefore they're
because
projecting.
someone from the initial time started the trauma.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's why we see trauma will be repeated by those who were traumatized, because now it's another defense mechanism, and there's so much powerlessness, right? Even in that moment, the teacher putting that on you, you were powerless to stop her from saying that.
Right.
So then we go to exert power later in life by doing the same thing that happened to us, right? And if we just were taught, like, you're gonna have crappy, horrible thoughts sometimes, like that's being a human. You get to decide what you want to be true for you and what you take, and then you get to decide what other people say, if that, takes hold, and you accept it, and you believe it, and you take ownership of it, and you get to decide that, right? And we're not really taught that, especially the ones that come up in our mind. Because we're like, well, it came from me,
Yeah, I think
right?
everything is true.
If it came from me,
It is true.
this is how I feel. This is how I think. And it's like, no, that's the mechanisms of the brain. You are a separate entity. So to the point of like beliefs and what you can do, it's like learning to be the observer of your internal dialogue versus reacting to it, right? Because that's what we do. We have a thought, we feel an emotion, and in a nanosecond, we react, right? And the brain can cross-reference everything from your past that remotely has been triggered or similar to that, and then create that response, right? And that's why most of us think the same way, feel the same way, react the same way we have before, because that's like a default pathway, right? It's like if you go sledding down a hill, everyone keeps going down the same path because it becomes easier, right? And then you also know what it looks like. It's predictable. That's how the brain works. And that's why over time, it gets harder to change. It gets worse. Your anxiety gets worse. Now you have panic attacks, right? Or it lasts longer, or you're more sensitive because that neural pathway gets more and more solidified. But the part of that that's amazing is the brain can always change.
So how does I'm sorry, I'm going to let you, because the last time I think I interrupted with you.
No.
Go.
I was just going to say, like, because the brain is such a powerful tool that sometimes we don't give it enough credit. So I remember I took a class in college about the mind. And one thing, like, with my husband that he's always been, like, intentional about, like, he rarely gets sick, because one thing he's just like, it's all in your head. Like, if you tell yourself you're not sick, so if he starting to get sick, he's like, I'm not sick. Don't tell me I'm sick. Like, if I'm sick, I'll tell you I'm sick. So that's something like we've always taught our kids. Like even like through things like it just teaching our kids like how the brain is powerful. So what you say is what you're manifesting. So it's kind of good to see, because like then when we got COVID, like he finally surrendered to it when he's like, and the first time he's like, yeah, like I'm dying. But the entire time, like we both got COVID, but our 3 kids in the same home didn't get it, because every morning he's like, you guys are not sick. Get up, take your vitamins, and it's just like they never surrender to it. So even now, like my kids are like, are you doing okay? Like, are you sick? Like we just had the cold went through our house, and they're like, no. Like even though you can hear the sniffle, but they get up and they went and play, because they just never let their mind surrender to it, because they just like it just how powerful. Like if you really like sit in it, like because there's days I'm like, I'm not working today, I'm not motivated, it ain't happening. But if I wake up and I'm like, today. I'm going to work, you know what I mean? Train myself to be like, I'm going to get this done. Like my brain and my body just adapt to it, and I'm just ready to go. So it just, like our words really matter of what we spit out, because the brain then kind of like attach to what we're saying and then become that.
Right.
So.
And to that point, the reason why COVID also had such a huge impact is they wired so much fear around it. So I'm not saying that it didn't have a real impact, but if you have a fear that if I get this, I'm going to the hospital, I'm going to stop breathing, and you get it, and your brain is predicting and perpetuating. And I'm not saying that, again, it's real, and you're talking to someone who's fought for her life, and I know how scary a virus can be, but I also know, because it's literally one reason I've survived, how powerful the mind is. And I saw people who were like, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. And they did, right? And what's crazy is medically, both with the mental health and physical health, we don't fully accept this because we get a diagnosis and then we attach our identity to it, right? I have anxiety. And it's not that you do experience anxiety. You might have a habit of anxiety, but as soon as we attach our identity to it, the brain also has to validate that identity, right? So it's funny because I've spoken to doctors both in the mental health and physical health, and I'm like, it's crazy that you don't fully embrace this because the placebo effect points exactly to this.
Yeah.
Like, this is how drugs and things come to be. You literally can give people a sugar pill and their heart will have the same reaction as if you gave it blood pressure medicine. So there's proof in science already, right? But we're not giving it
But
the
it doesn't
credence.
make money. They don't make money off placebos.
It's very true. But also that puts personal responsibility on the person, right?
Exactly.
And that's where we have a barrier also, because it's like, it's up to you.
Yeah.
You're the only one inside your mind and body. So we all have a place where we have to rise above being a victim of what's happened to us, the circumstances. And it's not that we aren't victims of things, right? Things have happened to each of us. We didn't choose. Other people chose. Life chose. But we get to decide what we do with that and how it defines us. And that's where personal responsibility comes in. And some people don't want to do it, right?
And you say that a lot. I think that's a great point. I love that point because I think we become a victim of our circumstances. I always says that because like, and I don't like to talk about my story, compare my story to anything, but like I look at people that have been through the same thing I've been. Like I was adopted, I went through abuse, I was neglected, I was on my own. But I remember one thing when I finally turned 18 and moved out, I was like, yeah, this happened to me. But one thing I'm not gonna do, I'm not gonna let what happened to me become the person that I am. So like I work really hard every day, like on my mentality of like, I'm not gonna become a victim. Because people can like, you know, I tell people my story, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sad for you. Like you should be like this person. Like you should be so angry. You should like not be, you know what I mean? You shouldn't be a success, right? But if you allow people, like we're talking, to put something on you, and sometimes it's hard, like to not have that. But sometimes, like you said, we have to be the one to be like, I'm not gonna become victim to what you think's gonna happen to me. Like you have to be the one to kind of like overcome that and change that. So
I can't wait for my teenage daughter to watch this.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so
If we could teach all kids.
too.
But to that point, I do want to say, some people, and that's why I have my work, is some people's nervous system has been so altered that it doesn't matter how much they try to think positively, and we can see that with PTSD. And I mean, I have clients who are like, my life is actually good. And consciously, I know that. Like consciously, I know, look at, I'm healthy, I've got my kids, I've got my career. Like they can see it, but subconsciously, their system's running a different program. And that's why no matter what they're doing consciously, they're not able to get free of how their experiences have changed them, right? And that's just dependent on the person. So to that point, that's where I want to tell those people who are like, I get this, but it's not changing still for me. And then that erodes their sense of shame and guilt and like, what's wrong with me?
Hopelessness.
And that's where, you know, what I do comes in to actually change what's happening in the subconscious and rewire the impact. Because trauma is an individual, meaning how the brain encodes an experience. There's real trauma, right, that we can all point to, but someone's brain can encode an experience completely different, and it's altered in a way that now impacts them the rest of their life. And that's why it's so important to get to that deeper place that's running in, because the subconscious mind controls 95% of us by the time we're 35.
Amazing.
Ooh. Okay, so with that being said, all of us have children here, and I'm big on like affirmations because I believe what we say obviously is true. Do you have any things you do with your daughter? Like, do you say affirmations? Do you do visualizations with her? Like, how can we start implementing this into our babies?
One of, so funny, 'cause I just had this conversation with my daughter this morning. She's like, Mom, I know, she does it all the time when I'm trying to teach her. She's 8. And I was like, listen, child, this is golden information. Yeah. So I'm like, I know, Mom, because she's heard me talk about it. With affirmations, I think this is one of the most important things to teach your kids. Sometimes there can be a resistance around it because it's like, I am not that thing. I don't feel that way, right? And there's a kind of like a disingenuine, I feel like a fake saying this. Yeah. So the most important thing is for them to understand how their brain works. So here's another part of the brain. The brain does not engage in deciphering if what we're saying is good or bad or true or false. It just responds. So to that point, if you keep saying, I don't want this to happen, I don't want this to happen, I don't want this to happen, your brain isn't saying she doesn't want this to happen, it's just going, oh, she's focusing on this. We amplify that, right? So the brain is not deciphering, oh, that's not a good thought, that's not a bad thought. It just is focusing on what we're focusing on, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. So affirmations, and this really breaks the barrier away people feel, it's not saying this is true in this moment. It is saying, this is what I want to be true. Mm-hmm. This is how I want to feel. This is the outcome I want in my life. So by affirming it, by saying it, I'm directing my brain and my body towards that outcome, to look for information towards that outcome. To then, when something good happens at school, my brain goes, oh, look, I'm amazing.
Yeah. To find the evidence,
smart.
Right?
To find
the evidence that statement was true.
Evidence. And so when people understand that, that's like, oh, okay. And that's another important question for them to think. What a good interrupter to the brain is when a thought comes up or a belief, just to say, okay, that is maybe how I feel or what I'm thinking, but do I want that to be true?
Validate it and question it.
Do I want it to be true? Absolutely, because I am not about like, don't ignore what you're feeling. There's a huge place of being able to process how we feel, and that validates the challenges we go through. We're human beings, so we're gonna have feelings. We're not robots. So you absolutely, there's a place to allow, because that also reaffirms our stress response. When we feel an emotion and we're like, don't feel that way.
Yeah.
Be strong, right? That's a weakness.
Yeah.
You shouldn't feel angry.
Yeah.
You should feel grateful, right? I don't care if your
Feel
friends
even more
just
angry.
betrayed you. Yeah. Like, and it's like, well, we don't want to dwell there, but not processing that anchors in the experience all the more and traumatizes it to the brain.
I love that, because maybe that's why people that are not going to agree with me. I don't like affirmations. I teach my kids. Let me tell you.
Fighting words.
I know. And this is what I'm saying, everybody, because I'm relating to what you're saying. Because I feel like what it does, it stops kids' emotion to stop right there. So if my daughter wake up one morning, she look at me and it's like, I don't feel good today. Like, I feel like crap. I want her to feel that. The reason I want her to feel that, then she can process of how, because what we telling ourselves, you wake up, it's like, you don't feel it, but I'm going to stand in the mirror, I'm going to force myself to say I'm beautiful. Then you're stopping your brain from really processing. That's
But isn't it kind of the same thing you were just talking about with colds and being sick?
Yeah, but but the difference is, it's like, what the affirmation is like, I'm beautiful, I'm smart. Those are the things that I feel like it's kind of like a little bit of a danger of emotion, because I think the way that you just explained it, it's just like, stop right there, don't feel it. I feel like my kids, I say, feel it. This is the time to feel it, to process it. Because when you go out there and somebody look at you and says, I'm ugly, but you've already processed that, because you already know I'm not ugly. Like, I know I'm not ugly. Because you processed it before. So that's where I feel like we don't do affirmation. It's like, if you wake up and you feel the way you feel, I want you to feel that. Like, if your kid is crying and you say, stop crying, and then they stop. But why were they crying? There was a reason why they were crying. So let's process that reason. So next time that thing comes up, they can process and be like, oh yeah, I worked through that and I know how to deal with that and I'm okay, I'm good. So I feel like a lot of the time, I'm not saying don't do it. You can do affirmation. I'm just saying sometimes it limit kids to stop just right there.
Well, I think at the end of that situation that you were just talking about, that's when the affirmation comes. Like,
Yes,
you process
absolutely.
your
Yes,
feelings, feel that.
absolutely.
Now let's
I'm good with
I've
that.
always told my kids, you can't just get rid of the bad by getting rid of the bad. You've got to fill the void with good.
Yes.
And so
Right. So there's if you think of
Ashleigh's like, shut
I know
up.
you.
No,
I love this.
Everybody's like affirmation.
This is perfect. No, it's perfect. It's perfect. To your point, and this was a huge part of why the stress response was running in my body when I was sick. Because and listen, we all have times we need to survive and fight, but I didn't allow myself to cry, have a bad day, feel sorry for myself, and when I did, I guilted myself. I shamed. And you got to fight. You got to be tough, right?
Yep.
That doesn't go away because you don't acknowledge it. Huge piece, we attach our identity to our emotions, right? I'm not a mad person. I shouldn't feel angry, right? I'm not a sad person. I shouldn't feel sad. It's like you can't live a fulfilling life without going through all the spectrums of emotions. Like so the point, we would absolutely have far less mental illness, less anxiety, less depression if we were taught that emotions are part of being human, and we are allowed to feel them, to release them, because we have an intention that if I go here, I'm going to stay there. I can't cry, I can't feel that, then I'm going to get stuck there. Well, if that's your belief, your brain has a huge threat response around emotions, right?
Oh my gosh, say that again louder, because that's what, like in foster care, that's what we deal with. Kids believe that's like, you can't show emotion, you can't cry. Like I say, like in my home, my daughter, I said like, girl, cry it out. Like cry it out. Like you feel it, this is home, I want you to feel every emotion. And then when you're done, let's talk and process it. Because we are told to like, you have to have it together. You have to keep it together. You have to, and then when we deal like our kids in trauma and foster care, they don't want to talk about the trauma because they're like, if I talk about it, I'm weak. I've accepted it. I've da-da-da. And so they keep it inside. And it's like killing them. And it's like, no, like find somebody you trust and a therapist you trust and let that crap out. Like feel it so then you can heal through it.
I was reading somewhere about, they were looking at animals and like saying like, you know, some of these animals have been in really traumatic experiences, you know, a gazelle getting attacked by a lion and then surviving. Like how are they able to just function after some of these like near-death experiences? And they were looking at their behavior and found that after the attack or whatever traumatic experience, they actually shook their bodies and they often would run. But as humans, we are often like, oh no, I gotta be strong, I gotta be this, I gotta do that, I can't. And what I was reading was that essentially you're getting your body stuck in frozen state, and you're actually storing the negative trauma in your body. You didn't release it. So there's actually like things that you should do physically after a traumatic experience to like shake off that stuff and get it out. So I like that idea of like, no, cry, get it out, right? Because if you're holding on to it, it's gonna stay, right?
Some animals will actually die if they don't. So I teach my clients to shake. What it does, it actually triggers the amygdala physiologically, which is the emotional area of the brain, and it tells it the trauma has passed. So animals are not as complex or adaptive as we are. Human beings are the most adaptive creatures, right? An animal will only be an animal. Look at what all of us as human beings can be in so many different variables and forms and intelligence and athletic and arts, and we're the most adaptable creature that exists, and our bodies can handle so much more, but then it hurts us because we do store it, and then it does come out in our mental or emotional health. So I teach my clients to literally shake.
So like think of a traumatic memory
and
then shake?
Here's where people go wrong with a lot of trauma. We're trying to force. Like you're gonna come and we're gonna release. You have to partner with your system. So we're all gonna have certain circumstances where we'll be triggered. And triggered has such a negative connotation, and I teach my clients that it's actually an amazing opportunity to learn where we are not healed. And it's not about that other person. Whatever's coming up in you isn't healed. So because it's come up, instead of, oh my gosh, I'm so triggered, how do I get this to go away? It's like, well, this has been in my system. And I need to release this. What do I need to write out, feel out, express, process? Because this is a gift that it's come up, and now I actually want to work through it, right? So triggering has such a bad connotation, but the reality is the more we work through that, we don't need to be triggered. And we don't need to have triggers the rest of our life. To manage and mitigate and avoid, that's why myself, and I mean, be able to heal PTSD, like, because the brain can keep processing those layers out.
I feel like I get triggered when I see.
So, okay, so I'm triggered.
People say I'm triggered. I'm like,
I got triggered when she talked about affirmations.
I know, but listen though. I know. Because I like this point. Like, the thing is, because we all live, because we're used to being told, like, you know, the word trigger is a thing, right? Like, I'm gonna avoid this because I'm triggered, like you said. And that's one thing we teach sheets, like, when you feel that trigger, then feel it, because then that's your body saying, like, we're not healed. There's a scar that's open that you need to deal with it.
Yeah.
So
And it's not that
don't
we
avoid it.
don't have boundaries, right?
Yes.
And we don't
Yes.
willingly put ourselves in hurtful situations. But we're all
comes
going to
up.
have stuff come up by nature of our experiences. Now, going back, because I can feel the energy, Robin, the affirmations, here's where they both come into place.
Yes.
We
Being able
don't-
to feel,
we
but
don't-
also
That's
affirming.
right. We don't always have emotions, right? So in that regard, when you just wake up and it's a normal day, what do I
Yeah.
want to direct my brain to? I'm going to have an amazing day at school. I'm going to make friends. I'm going to, do amazing on my math test because I am smart. And people like me and I am confident, right? That now directs my brain to live that experience,
Positivity.
right?
Yep. Yeah.
So that absolutely has its place. Like,
Yes.
what is the outcome I want? It's like people always say, oh my gosh, I'm so afraid for this, I'm so afraid for this. I'm like, well, you can give focus to that, or what do you want to happen? And why
Focus on
not
that.
start prepping your brain for that? So when you get there, your brain is trying to create that experience.
Yes.
But when the emotions do come up, that's when we don't just shut them down and replace with an affirmation. Because I've seen that a lot. Stop, replace. No,
Yeah.
process, because emotions are our greatest teachers. I'm
Yes.
feeling something because I've been impacted by something. And it might not even be today. It just is hitting me today.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to allow it. I'm going to ask some questions.
Curious.
I'm going to be curious. And I'm going to process it. And then once I feel I've done that, now I'm going to take control.
And focus.
And focus on
the positive.
how I want to feel. And that could take 20 minutes, that could take an hour, that could take a day, right?
Yeah.
But it's giving space, but then there does have to come that place. My daughter had a lot of fears she went through, and she went through trauma with what she went through with me, right? Because she was 2. And she suddenly was going through this phase of having fearful of doing things, and we allowed it and we sat with it. But then I took her one day to dance and she didn't want to go out of the car. And I said, listen, we've processed this, we've sat with this, but I want you to know that if you keep allowing this to run, it will hold you prisoner the rest of your life. And you're going to be afraid to do everything, because that's how the brain works. So then there's a point of, like, if you don't go in there and tell your brain, no, I can do this, because we've sat, we've processed, then it's going to keep doing this. And when I sat there and I said, and I'm not leaving until you do.
That's some
Yep.
good parenting right there.
Yeah, it is.
And she walked in crying, right?
But she did it.
And it's hard as a mom, because we don't want
You
our
wanna-
parents to hurt, but and I feel like in the mental health space now, we're getting too far into feeling and never
Compassion,
never
compassion.
getting
Like,
to that
exactly.
place.
And then not
Yes,
asking
Exactly.
never getting
Yeah.
to the place.
It's like,
That's what I was
that's
going
what
to
I'm-
say with
yeah.
your affirmation thing. It's like, allow your daughter to say, Mom, I'm fat, I'm ugly.
Yeah.
Feel it. And then you're going to tell yourself you're
Yes,
not.
exactly.
Which is where
Yeah,
I feel
And
like
so me, I just feel like it's
affirmations are
process, because
important.
like I used to I just see people post and I see like my friend's house, like oh my gosh, like I'm having a hard day, and it's like, you're beautiful, you're smart, like to kind of like put that stop in that emotion. I'm just like,
Put a binky in it, shut it up.
literally, it's like that Band-Aid that's gonna come off anytime soon, and it's like, no,
Yeah, that makes
it's
sense.
okay, let her express
a
why
hard
she's
day.
going to. It's a
Yeah.
hard day. It's okay
Yeah.
to have hard day. We have hard
Yes,
days.
and we're not lying with ourselves.
Exactly. Then when she's done processing, be like, girl, you got this. You're beautiful.
Yeah.
Go out there and kick the,
That's
go
right.
kick it. Let's
Yeah.
go. That's
And
it.
if you
That's
need
what
to
I'm saying.
freaking have a hard day and get in your pajamas and get in bed,
Thank you. Just do
Yeah,
it. I told my
do
dad,
it.
I was
You know what
like,
I mean?
oh, you having a hard day? Girl, go in your room. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah.
Take your time. Do your music. You chill in there. When you're ready, come join us.
so
Come join us.
I think you guys are actually on the same line,
Yeah,
right?
I think what we're trying to say
different-
is feel the emotion.
She was ready to
Let you
put
have the bad
affirmation
day,
attack
but
right
I
there.
agree with you. We're coddling too much. There is a point where you're like, get out of the car
Yes.
and go to dance.
Absolutely.
Stop telling
Yes.
yourself you're fat.
You guys,
You know?
I taught at a university for years, and I would have students they went through a breakup and they're like, I have to pull out of the semester.
Yeah, like,
And I'm
no.
like, that is a rite of passage of being an adult.
Uh-huh.
I'm not saying it's not hard, but like to say now, like that's where we're getting stuck in feeling the feelings. And there's a place where we process, but then we got to make a decision.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Okay, I'm allowing it. I'm going to allow it if it comes up again. But what do I want to feel and experience in my life? And do I want to believe that I'm powerless or I'm powerful? And what can I learn from this experience? Because the hurt also teaches us the opposite, right? If we felt anger, we also know what it feels to not feel anger. If we felt sorrow, we know what hope is and joy.
Yeah.
They're contrasts, right?
Yeah.
But we ultimately have to decide, right, where we get stuck.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where I feel like, here's a point, and this is going to maybe rub you wrong. A popular saying is you're enough just exactly as you are. And I feel that that can be a really negative thing in terms of someone's like, what if I hate myself? And I got depression, I've got anxiety, and I feel worthless. You're telling me
I'm enough.
that I don't need to change?
Right.
Right? And it's like, no, our worth has no variability, okay, as human beings, but your potential is limitless. So I want you to know that just because you're struggling, you're not worth less than another human being, but you can be more.
Yeah.
Right.
You can be more. Because when you tell someone, like, nope, you're enough, like exactly how you are, and they're like, but I'm throwing up every morning because I'm so afraid to go. So that's what we're cutting off the like,
Limitation.
there's a certain point we all got to square our shoulders, right? And be like, I'm going to allow this, I'm not going to judge myself, but I am going to take control.
Yeah.
And to that point of steps, I just want to, before I forget, because this conversation's gone other way, I have a mind-body blueprint that has a 3-step action plan to start rewiring, right? Because obviously bioemotional healing is an in-depth 9-week process, and it for people who are ready and really want to do the work and get free. But where do I start, right? And if that's just where you're at, on my website, ashleighdilello.com or freemindbodyblueprint.com, really simple 3-step, what you can start doing each day. And the very first is what I mentioned about being that observer, that curious observer, because we cannot change what we're not really aware of.
Yeah.
Right.
And we all know we are the way we are, but we just react to it and we're not observing. And the reason why I say observing is we're neutral. Because what do we all do? Well, we judge that emotion, we criticize that thought, right? And you know what's crazy? They've mapped the brain, and when we criticize or judge, it turns on the brain's alarm bells. So whatever stress response we're judging, we've just amplified.
We're going to put that link in the comments.
let's do that.
I have
so people
one
can find it.
big question that I feel like it's been somehow like we've gotten onto the mindset stuff, but your story is an overcome of illness, of pain, of things that I think many of us would say are objectively factual. It is not like I wanted this or that I got into some negative thought loop and that's why I have. How does what you do and what this download is, and how does that actually affect physical disease, ailments, pain? How does that work?
Well, what is the number one cause of illness in our world? And it's a disease. Stress. Most deaths occur from stress-caused illnesses. And I'm not saying that things don't exist, but stress is the number one cause of breakdown in the body. Now, to my point, I at 13 years old was not stressed. I got a virus, right? And to that point, I went into a surgery. But when we're in stress, right, we're running in our sympathetic nervous system. It does not have resources to live there, and most of us are living there. So that leads to breakdown of the body. But if, let's say, something happens, like in my case, I didn't choose, I didn't create, right? And I'm not saying people consciously create illness, but by living in stress, we're making ourselves way more susceptible. And then whatever our genetic disposition is, now we become more susceptible to it happening, right? But when you're in breakdown, then your ability, your body's threshold to handle everything we're thrown at in life is way less. And then all the resources are going to that stress response and not to healing, right? So I believe and know we were designed to heal. That's our innate intelligence. When you cut something, your body goes immediately to start repairing it, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived as long as we have. But we have barriers to healing. And a lot of that begins in the mind, because the body also validates whatever the brain believes, because the brain's controlling the body, right? So in that regard, it's not just the illness or what happens, but getting sick, losing your health, living in pain, which is a hell I wouldn't wish on anyone, it hugely impacts you as a person, your emotional health, your mental health. You can't go through physical stuff and not be deeply impacted on a mental and emotional level, right? It alters your life. It's the ultimate powerlessness. Because also you can't go get anything out, right? When people are like, I get my stress out on a run. Well, when you're stuck in your bed, you're stuck with yourself, and you got to figure out, right? So the brain and nervous system are the command center of everything. So when you can align that towards healing and not stress, and you heal all the different pieces of your life that are impacting you. Because when you get sick, your ability to handle it isn't just that moment in time. It's what's been running in your system, and what might be triggered from something previous that now it's just coming up to the surface, right? And so healing all those different pieces, and also when you lose your health, it's fear. And medically, it's fear, right? And I understand, and you know, there's a certain threshold of like, this is what you're facing, but what I hate is this is what's possible.
Yeah.
This is what, and then once we embody that, the body cannot overcome that. Right? It's like people always say, I mean, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I was diagnosed with chronic regional pain syndrome, interstitial cystitis. None of those have cures. None of them. They are lifelong pain diagnoses, right? Pain is the number one health condition in the world, because pain is the most confusing, because you can have MRIs and there's nothing wrong, but you're living in horrific pain because you can't see what's happening in the nervous system. So to your point, the brain's command center of everything. And both in how we think and how we communicate about the body, and most importantly, the environment that the body's living in every day. Because a mind in stress is ultimately going to show up with a body in stress.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
I love that.
So for you, you had all this pain. Where are you at now with your pain and your illness and that you had? How has what you've done, you know, led to where you're at physically now?
Yeah, I'm nearly 100% free.
Amazing.
Got one small area left. By nature of what happened to my hip, it had a huge structural problem with my body, right? The surgeon actually left a hole in my hip. So my whole spine was curving to, so there was that side, right? And I did ultimately end up finding one of 2 surgeons in the world to fix that, because even that, there's a hole in my hip. My body knows that. Like I can't, there are times where I'm saying absolutely surgery's necessary. Treatment is, you have to treat the body. I'm never obviously, but the ramifications wired my whole nervous system into pain. And I have one area left, which is the most nerves in the entire body, but I'm almost there, but everything else is gone.
That is incredible. Actually, I feel like we need to have you on for a series.
Yeah.
All of us are obviously very
Let's
very intrigued, and we want to tell her things, and we want to hear her tell things, but unfortunately, we are out of time. So tell us, where can we find you on social media, website? Like, if someone wants to contact you or learn more about you, how do they do that?
Well, let's come back. Like the brain is amazing, and I'm sure the audience has other things I know, I love it. It's my love language now. But you can find me on my website, ashleighdilello.com, and it's spelled weird, so look in the show notes, I imagine.
Yes.
Social media is Ashleigh Dilello. From there, you can get the Mind Body Blueprint there, or freemindbodyblueprint.com. From my website, there's a free training on the brain, where I dive deeper, and because the more we understand how the brain works, the more we actually can separate ourselves from our struggle, right? So there's a free training there, and of course the option to schedule a free consult with me to see if we are a good fit for bioemotional healing. And then I have a podcast, Body Freedom Radio, which is coming back on, but all those things.
Yes,
So
that's
awesome.
it.
We'll put all of those links in the description box.
What a powerful episode. Thank you so much.
welcome.
If you have any questions you want us to ask Ashleigh maybe next time on
Yeah,
the show,
sure, we
or
can do
us,
Q&A.
leave them in the notes. Thank you guys for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.
I have some questions for you. Hey, brave girl,